All right, everybody, welcome back to YouTube with Mr. Pioric. This is a video that's going to be talking about some of the stuff you read in the book of Revelation, as I saw you last time, specifically these 7 trumpets. Now, you might be thinking, 7 trumpets? I remember 7 seals. Well, guess what? Once you open the 7th seal, that's when you get the 7 trumpets. And you should get used to this because we're even going to have 7 bowls later that are poured out. If you are using your thinking cap of biblical numerology, you'll remember 7 is the number of days during the creation, 6 days of creation. Then God rested on the 7th, and 7 becomes the number of completion, the number of God. And we have these cycles of 7s, the 7 seals, and then we have the 7 trumpets. Now, as I've read the book of Revelation and studied it and listened to lectures, I've come upon some interesting ideas about these 7 trumpets, and I want to share them to you. But before we do, you need to remember a couple things I talked to you about already. If you remember my last screencast or video, I talked about, actually it was during our Zoom meeting. I talked about 4 different ways people interpret the book of Revelation. And I talked about 2 specifically that we applied to our readings about the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse in chapter 6. And if you remember, the 2 that we really focused on was 1, the futurist. These are people that believe the things presented in the book of Revelation are things that are going to happen in the future, that are going to signal the end times coming. For example, if the horseman of war was viewed in a futurist lens, it means that a great war will probably happen before the end of the world. The other view that we looked at is the symbolic view, the view that these are more symbols that the author of Revelation is using in order to communicate some kind of pertinent information or message to the people that are in the 1st century Roman Empire that he's writing to. These are not necessarily prophecies about the future. They're messages about their current time told through the use of symbols. In that case, the Lamb opening up the 2nd seal and letting the horsemen of war out could be more a symbol about God's ultimate control over things like war. That even though Rome is super powerful as a warring nation, and they've defeated many people through war, God can send a horseman out like war that's even stronger than that. So that's a symbol about God being more powerful than Rome, not necessarily a sign of something to come in the future. So let's talk about how that applies to the idea of these 7 trumpets. So let's go into the book of Revelation. I got my Bible right here. And this starts in Revelation chapter 8. So, John says this, "Then the 7 angels who had the 7 trumpets prepared to sound them. The first angel sounded his trumpet, and there came hail and fire mixed with blood, and it was hurled down upon the earth. A third of the earth was burned up, a third of the trees were burned up, and all the green grass was burned up." So we go, whoa, hail and fire. So with the futurist, the person that's looking for these things to actually occur in the future and bring in the end times, would they believe that there's going to be some crazy amount of hail that happens? Well, not necessarily. You see, even the futurists read a lot of this stuff symbolically, where they say, yeah, there'll be something like this. Now, one thing that's important, they go, is, hey, this is stuff happening in the future. And John is in 1st century Mediterranean, where there's going to be things he sees that happen in the future that he won't understand. So let's say he had a vision of the year 2020 and he sees someone using a smartphone. He wouldn't know what a smartphone is. He wouldn't even know what a phone was. He wouldn't even know what a telegram was. trumpets. These are all things that would be confusing to John, so he'd use whatever kind of language he could to explain it. So the futurist might say he's doing his best, but what he's seeing here isn't actually hailfire, it's something else. And so what that's allowed a lot of people to do is to see things that are happening in history and interpret them as being the thing that John describes as something in Revelation. These are the ones I remember the most from my youth, these things with the 7 trumpets. So I'm going to go through some interpretations that the futurists might have about these 7 trumpets, and it'll be kind of interesting, I think. So I want to first give some credit, here we go, to someone who I got some information from. So I'm going to share my screen real quick so you can see it. I don't know if any of you are familiar with the Teaching Company. They do courses that you can listen to on audio that are by important professors. And this professor, Craig Kester, did one on the apocalypse, which is just wonderful. I loved it. And it's actually informed a lot of the ways I think about the book of Revelation. So I got to give him some credit. And I'm going to read you some of his reading from this part about the 7 trumpets. So when I read him, I'll let you know. And he explains how some of the futurists would view this, which I think is pretty interesting. All right. So let's get into it. Let's get into the 7 trumpets. All right. Now, there's some trumpets. Let's look at the first trumpet again. It was hailfire mixed with blood. It hurled down upon the earth. A third of the earth was burned up, and a third of the trees were burned up, and all the green grass was burned up. You know what some people thought? Now, this became a whole kind of long series of events people saw unfolding through history, which they thought was the 7 trumpets occurring. And the first thing they said about this first trumpet is that maybe this was actually the bombing of Europe during World War II. Let's see what Professor Kester says about it. All right, he said this: the fiery vision brought on by the first angel is connected with World War II in a futuristic perspective. The hail and fire that fall from the sky are identified with the aerial bombings that occurred during the war, wreaking unprecedented devastation. So sometimes people would read this and they go, it's just like what happened in World War II. That was the first trumpet. Oh my gosh, keep an eye out for the second trumpet. Let's read it. The second trumpet goes like this. The second angel sounded his trumpet, and something like a huge mountain all ablaze was thrown into the sea. A third of the sea turned into blood, a third of the living creatures in the sea died, and a third of the ships were destroyed. Wow, something like a huge mountain was thrown into the sea. Now, I'll give you a second to guess. What do you think maybe was, did the futurists think the second trumpet was? Remember, we already had the aerial bombings during World War II. What could it be? Well, some of them thought it was the atomic bomb being dropped. This is what Professor Kester says. When the second angel blows his trumpet, something like a great mountain burning with fire is thrown into the sea. A third of the sea is turned to blood, many ships are destroyed, and many sea creatures die. Some of the futuristic readings identify this fiery mountain with the mushroom clouds that arose following the nuclear blasts at Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So they go, hey, first trumpet was the aerial bombings. Second trumpet was the atomic bomb, like a giant mountain, was that big explosion, the mushroom cloud that came out of it. And so we see it progress along history. Let's see about the third trumpet. The third angel sounded his trumpet, and a great star, blazing like a torch, fell from the sky on a third of the rivers and on the third of water. The name of the star is Wormwood. A third of the waters turned bitter, and many people died from the waters that had become bitter. Guess what? This one's my favorite one. Do you think you know what they think was the third trumpet? Like a star falling called Wormwood turned everything bitter. It's going to surprise you, but I think you'll think it's pretty interesting why people think this. Well, we'll give you a moment to see if you can guess. And here's what they often think it is. Yes, Chernobyl. What? Well, here's what they say. When the third, this is Kester talking again, Professor Kester. When the third angel blows his trumpet, a star called Wormwood falls from heaven, embittering the waters of the earth and causing those who drink these waters to die. For many futuristic interpreters, this was what happened in 1986 with the meltdown of the nuclear reactor at Chernobyl in the former Soviet Union. Now, you might say, what? That doesn't sound right. Why would Chernobyl be this star Wormwood? Hey, you want to know something? Do you know what Chernobyl means in Russian? It means wormwood. That's right. Are you convinced now? Well, maybe you should be. Let's go into the fourth one. The fourth angel sounded his trumpet, and a third of the sun was struck, a third of the moon, and a third of the stars, so that a third of them turned dark. A third of the day was without light, and also a third of the night. So everything goes dark. What could it be? What do those futurists have in mind? I'll let you take a guess. This is what some of them say. They say when the fourth angel blows his trumpet, actually this is what Professor Kester describes it as, when the fourth angel blows his trumpet, the sky becomes dark and the light of the sun, moon, and stars is dimmed. According to the scenario we've been following from the futurists, this would equate to the Gulf War. At the end of that war in 91, Saddam Hussein set hundreds of oil wells on fire, darkening the sky with smoke. Crazy. Let's look at the fifth one. The fifth angel sounded his trumpet, and I saw a star that had fallen from the sky to the earth. The star was given the key to the shaft of the abyss. When he opened the abyss, smoke rose from it like the smoke from a gigantic furnace. The sun and the sky were darkened by the smoke from the abyss, and out of the smoke, locusts came down upon the earth. They were given power like that of scorpions of the earth. They were told not to harm the grass of the earth or any plant or tree, but only those people who did not have the seal of God on their foreheads. They were not given power to kill them, but only to torture them for 5 months. That's still pretty bad. And the agony they suffered was like that of the sting of a scorpion when it strikes a man. During those days, men will seek death, but will not find it. They will long to die, but death will elude them. The locusts looked like horses prepared for battle. On their heads they wore something like crowns of gold, and their faces resembled human faces. Their hair was like women's hair, and their teeth were like lions' teeth. They had breastplates like breastplates of iron, and the sound of their wings was like the thundering of many horses and chariots rushing into battle. They had tails and stings like scorpions, and in their tails they had the power to torment people for, 5 months. They had as king over them the angel of the abyss, whose name in Hebrew is Abaddon, and in Greek, Apollyon. Well, these locusts are crazy. They look weird, and they're scary, and we might wonder, what could they be talking about? Well, remember, this is when you have to remember the futurist perspective that maybe John is seeing something, but he doesn't know how to describe it. That's why these things are so weird, because he's like, I don't know what this is. It looks kind of like a locust with a weird crown and a person's face and teeth. Well, this one's my favorite because I remember this when I was a kid, somebody telling me this before. If you want to guess what some of the futurists would say, they say that those locusts are actually helicopters. What, you might say? Well, let me read you what Professor Kester says. The trumpeting of the fifth angel causes demonic locusts to fly out of the underworld. These locusts have faces like human beings, teeth like lions, and the mysterious power to inflict pain using their tails. For some people, this is a vision of modern military helicopters, which have human pilots, yet fly like insects and can shoot fire in combat. And you can see on our picture here, they have wings, like sound of horse-drawn chariots, a crown of gold. I don't know, that's just with that one. But you know the teeth here, the lion, breastplates of iron, the weird tail of a scorpion, the face of a man, because there's a man in there. Whoa. That's pretty interesting. What do you think of that one? That one is, in fact, my favorite. Well, that and Chernobyl are pretty good. Let's look at the sixth trumpet, because this one is pretty good too. Let's read it. Here we go. The sixth angel sounded his trumpet, and I heard a voice coming from the horns of the golden altar that is before God. It said to the sixth angel who had the trumpet, release the four angels who are bound at the great river Euphrates. And the four angels who had been kept ready for this very hour and day and month and year were released to kill a third of mankind. The number of the mounted troops was 200 million. I heard their number. Do you want to know what the horses looked like? The horses and riders I saw in my vision looked like this. Their breastplates were fiery red, dark blue, and yellow as sulfur. The heads of the horses resembled the heads of lions. And out of their mouths came fire, smoke, and sulfur. A third of mankind was killed by the three plagues of fire, smoke, and sulfur that came out of their mouths. The power of the horses was in their mouths and in their tails, for their tails were like snakes, having heads with which they inflict injury. Now, that is pretty crazy. What do you think the futurists think of all this? Well, I'll give you a moment to guess. Here's what some of them say. They say this must have been, tanks. Yes. The power of horses in their mouths and in their tails, because this thing can turn around, I guess. And they can shoot out things like snakes. I don't know. I don't get this one as much, but maybe it's a tank. Anyway, you can see that this is getting a lot of people to start looking for how can we apply this to our lives? How could what John have been seeing be real? Now, however you want to take it, take it. Maybe there will be giant locusts. Maybe there'll be helicopters. There are helicopters. Maybe that's what John was talking about. We're not here to decide that. We're reading this as a literature. So with that being said, I'd like to offer you a final thing. This comes from Professor Kester again, and I really like what he said about this. And what he says really is this, quote, in Revelation 8, the author seems to say, let me show you what an outpouring of divine wrath would look like. And who's he talking to? Well, if you remember earlier in the book, we have this vision of these martyrs who are crying to God saying, how long will you wait before you avenge us? And Kester says that this, maybe you can look at this as God's response, going, what you want to see what an outpouring of divine wrath would look like? And in Revelation 8 and 9, he shows us, he depicts plague after plague, this is Kester's words, afflicting the wicked on earth from every side. As each trumpet blows, an onslaught of horror rains down. But after the sixth trumpet, what has changed? Because if you read after the sixth trumpet, this is what it says. The rest of mankind that were not killed by these plagues still did not repent of the work of their hands. They did not stop worshiping demons and idols of gold, silver, bronze, stone, and wood, idols that cannot see or hear or talk. Nor did they repent of their murders, their magic arts, their sexual immorality, or their theft. So did it do any good, all this stuff? No, not really. They're still doing their thing. Their evil, murderous, magical stuff. So what Kester says is when it's time for the seventh trumpet, he shows maybe a different way God is going to communicate to these people his displeasure and his power, instead of just bombing everybody and killing everybody. So let's read chapter 10. Then I saw another mighty angel coming down from heaven. He was robed in a cloud with a rainbow above his head. His face was like the sun, and his legs were like fiery pillars. He was holding a little scroll which lay open in his hands. He planted his right foot on the sea and his left foot on the land, and he gave a loud shout like the roar of a lion. When he shouted, the voices of the seven thunders spoke, and when the seven thunders spoke, I was about to write, but I heard a voice from heaven say, "Hey, seal up what the seven thunders have said, and do not write it down." Then the angel I'd seen standing on the sea and on the land, raised his right hand to heaven, and he swore by him who lives forever and ever, who created the heavens and all that's in them, the earth and all that's in it, and the sea and all that's in it, and said, there will be no more delay. But in the days when the seventh angel is about to sound his trumpet, the mystery of God will be accomplished, just as he announced to his servants, the prophets. So the seventh trumpet goes, and he says, don't tell anybody what's going on. John, just be quiet, okay? You don't get to know this one. So what happens then? Something kind of weird. Then, you want something weird? None of this has been weird yet. Then the voice that I had heard from heaven spoke to me once more, go, take the scroll that lies open in the hand of the angel who's standing on the sea and on the land. So I went to the angel and asked him to give me the little scroll. What's he going to do? He's going to read the scroll, right? That's what you do with a scroll. No. He said to me, take it and eat it. It will turn your stomach sour, but in your mouth it will be as sweet as honey. I took the little scroll from the angel's hand and ate it. It tasted as sweet as honey in my mouth, but when I had eaten it, my stomach turned sour. Then I was told, you must prophesy again about many peoples, nations, languages, and kings. So here's what Kester kind of says, is that what we get here, instead of another trumpet of devastation, we get the first six trumpets are kind of God demonstrating, I could do all this stuff, but it's not going to make a difference. Instead, I'm going to use you, John. I'm going to put my message into you by making you eat it. And then, as it says at the end, you need to prophesy about it. So God's going to get his work done through people speaking and telling other people about what needs to be done rather than visiting all these plagues upon them. I thought that was an interesting idea. It's definitely different than the normal kind of just hellfire and brimstone raining down on everybody. So that was Professor Kester's idea, which I thought was pretty good. Why is the book bitter? Why does it taste good, but then it's bitter? Well, some people say, you know, it's good to get the words of God, but when it's a prophecy of destruction, it's bitter inside. So I thought that was interesting too. That leads you through the seven trumpets. I know you had more reading to do, but we'll talk about that later because this was quite a bit. I hope you found it interesting, by the way. There's lots of ways to interpret all this stuff. It's just when I find something that we can kind of flow with a little bit, I like to present it to you. All right, guys, enjoy yourselves. Stay safe out there. See you again soon.